Morning light edges across the ridge. The ground is cold. The sky is pale and silent. Frost settles along the stone steps while the air hangs still, as if the landscape is waiting for something to wake beneath it. Then the name enters the frame. Monticello. A house built with precision. A place shaped by revision, cost, and decisions that changed lives. The fade appears calm, yet the structure carries a history that never fully rests. Records show walls rebuilt, rooms altered, debts rising in the background while construction continued. Some visitors reported a feeling they could not explain, beauty held together by tension, order masking weight. Local stories speak of sounds in enclosed corridors and movement where nothing should move. Historians point instead to aging timber, shifting floors, and the mechanics of a house engineered beyond its time. Two explanations, both plausible, both incomplete. The estate stands between them, not haunted, not ordinary, suspended in unanswered space. The light climbs the dome. The grounds remain still. And the question lingers beneath the quiet surface of the hill. Is this a story of architecture and memory, or something the house has never finished telling? The year is late in the 18th century. The hill above the Virginia landscape holds a rising structure that is still unfinished. The light falls across scaffolding, stone, timber, and drawn lines that keep changing. Only after a few breaths does the name emerge, Monticello. Records show that the house was designed, revised, and rebuilt across decades, first as a Georgian-style estate and later reshaped after Jefferson's return from France. Walls shifted, roof lines changed, rooms were reimagined while construction continued. The design did not settle. It evolved under pressure, ambition, and expectation. Historians observe that few American homes of the period underwent this degree of architectural self-correction. The exterior appears calm today, but the early years held constant movement, plans rewritten before the previous versions were complete. Some visitors later described a sense of restlessness within the structure, as if the building itself resisted finality. Folklore frames that unease as the echo of a house that never found a single identity. Architectural historians offer a grounded explanation. Continual revision leaves traces of tension inside materials and proportions. Both readings remain. The ridge grows quiet. And a question forms beneath the symmetry. Why did this house refuse to stay finished? Construction advanced even when ledgers tightened. Financial records from the period show rising obligations while alterations continued. Columns were adjusted. Facades revised. Interiors reconstructed to reflect neoclassical ideals Jefferson studied abroad. The revisions carried intention and risk at the same time. Each improvement demanded new labor, new materials, and renewed uncertainty about stability. Historians believe this pattern reveals a mind unwilling to accept compromise, a house treated not as shelter, but as an idea in motion. The emotional weight appears in letters and account books from the era, where the cost of beauty coexisted with mounting debt. Some viewers interpret this as ambition exceeding practical limits. Others see it as the pursuit of intellectual order at personal expense. Folklore introduces another layer, claims that unresolved effort leaves energy within a structure, as if unfinished intention lingers inside beams and walls. Engineering offers a practical alternative. Frequent redesign creates stress points, subtle misalignments, and sound shifts over time. The result feels complex rather than supernatural. Both possibilities remain open. The consequence is visible even now, a house that appears serene while its history documents pressure beneath the design. The scale of revision can be measured. Records document an estate once spanning about 5,000 acres. Architectural notes describe multiple phases of construction across roughly 40 years. Monticello included two major building campaigns, with changes to roof lines, porticos, service passages, and fade geometry. At various points, the mansion contained more than 11,000 square feet of interior space across layered levels. The vegetable terrace stretched close to 1,000 feet along the hillside. Archival accounts show 130 enslaved individuals living on the plantation at most times, and more than 400 across generations. Their labor sustained construction, agriculture, and household operations while revisions continued. These numbers ground the narrative in verifiable scale. They reveal patterns of expansion, strain, and structural ambition. For historically minded viewers, they represent architectural experimentation inside a working plantation economy. For audiences drawn to mystery, the figures feel like evidence of a house shaped by effort that never fully resolved. The data does not decide meaning. It sharpens it, showing how permanence was built through constant revision. Even today, some visitors describe a subtle tension in certain areas of the structure. Not fear, not folklore alone, but a quiet awareness of complexity beneath symmetry. Local stories tie that feeling to the years when designs changed faster than completion could catch up, suggesting the building remembers motion more than rest. Historians respond with practical explanations. Layered construction produces variations in acoustics. Brick and timber expand and contract at different rates across seasons. Revised foundations shift sound through corridors in ways ordinary homes rarely replicate. Both views coexist without resolution. Paranormal tradition interprets lingering unease as a remnant of unfinished intention. Architectural analysis interprets the same sensation as the natural behavior of a structure shaped by decades of revision. The narrative does not close the question. It presents two paths, one emotional, one mechanical, each capable of explaining the same experience. Monticello stands between interpretation and evidence, refusing to collapse into a single explanation. The final consequence of redesign was not architectural alone. The years of modification formed a legacy of brilliance, pressure, adaptation, and cost. The house became a record of decisions that never settled, a monument to a vision that required constant correction. All factual loops return to the same root, a structure born from ambition and sustained through revision. The historical account remains intact. Jefferson designed the house, then redesigned it, reshaping identity through architecture even as financial and human pressures accumulated beneath the process. The rational explanation stands alongside the atmospheric one. Engineering explains the sounds. History explains the strain. Folklore explains the feeling. None replaces the others. Instead, they create a space where perception and fact overlap without conflict. The hill grows quiet again. The fade holds its balance. And one final question is left for the viewer, not answered, only offered. When a home is rewritten again and again in pursuit of perfection, does the cost vanish into history, or does some part of it remain in the walls that never stop changing? Above the fade, the dome rises in quiet contrast to the land around it. Records show that this feature did not belong to the earliest version of the house. It appeared after Jefferson returned from Europe, influenced by neoclassical forms he studied abroad. The structure looks graceful from a distance, balanced, complete. Yet its interior tells a different story. Historians note that the room beneath the dome was difficult to reach, narrow in approach, and uncomfortable across seasons. The stair was steep. The air grew warm in summer and cold in winter. The space existed more as symbol than as living area. Some visitors described admiration from the outside and detachment inside. The contrast created unease, beauty without purpose, presence without life. Folklore attaches meaning to that absence, suggesting that a room built but rarely used does not settle easily into the house around it. Architecture offers another explanation. Experimental forms produce spaces that resist ordinary occupation. Both ideas remain. The dome reflects light across the hill, and the question forms quietly. Why build a room no one was meant to live in? The construction of the dome required effort, material, and precision. Brickwork curved into shape. Timber framing supported the shell beneath the copper exterior. Work crews climbed the upper levels while revisions below continued across the estate. The ambition was real. The emotional consequence followed quietly. A space admired for meaning could not support daily life. Historians believe the feature represented intellectual aspiration, a mark of knowledge, taste, and architectural confidence, rather than domestic function. Letters and accounts from the period imply tension between vision and comfort. The house gained a symbol. The household gained a room that stood apart from use. Some viewers see this as beauty exceeding necessity. Others see a calculated choice to privilege ideas over convenience. Folklore approaches the emptiness differently, suggesting that a space left largely unoccupied carries a lingering stillness that observers interpret as presence. The grounded explanation points to environmental conditions, heat rising, air trapping, circulation limited by design. Either path leads to the same outcome. The dome became the most visible part of the house, and the least lived in. The physical reality can be measured. Records indicate the dome room spans roughly 20 feet across, with a ceiling rising more than 18 feet along the curve of the interior. The stair access remains narrower than primary routes through the house, reinforcing its distance from everyday movement. Monticello itself contains more than 11,000 square feet of interior area across layered levels and concealed workspaces. The estate extended across approximately 5,000 acres during Jefferson's ownership, supported by the labor of about 130 enslaved people at most periods, with more than 400 individuals living there across generations. The dome's construction added complexity, cost, and maintenance demands, while contributing little to daily occupation. To historically focused viewers, these numbers establish scale, ambition, and imbalance between visibility and purpose. To mystery-minded audiences, they create the sense of a landmark feature whose grandeur outlived its function. The metrics do not resolve interpretation. They intensify it, showing a room built for meaning rather than for life. Even today, some visitors describe a subtle awareness when standing near the upper level. Not fear, not sensation, but a feeling of distance within the architecture itself. Folklore connects that reaction to the idea of a room that never found its role, suggesting that unused spaces hold memory differently than lived-in rooms. Historians respond with grounded reasoning. The dome behaves unlike the rest of the house. Heat rises and remains trapped. Sound travels unevenly through curved plaster and brick. Temperature shifts create faint creaks as materials expand and settle. The explanation is mechanical, not supernatural. Yet neither interpretation cancels the other. The space offers two parallel readings, emotional and structural, both capable of producing the same experience. Monticello does not demand a conclusion. It presents tension without collapse, inviting viewers to question why the most symbolic room remains the most distant from ordinary life. The legacy of the dome is neither failure nor triumph alone. It represents a decision where meaning outweighed practicality, where architecture reached for symbolism and accepted discomfort as a consequence. The historical loop's close. Jefferson redesigned the house, introduced the dome, and created a feature celebrated from afar and avoided in daily use. The rational explanation remains intact. The atmospheric reading remains present. Both shape the perception of the space. The estate below continues its patterns of labor, structure, and memory, while the room above stands suspended between purpose and absence. The house holds the contrast without resolving it. Light fades across the copper surface. The ridge grows quiet. And one question remains, not moralized, not answered, only left for the listener to consider. When a structure chooses meaning over utility, does its emptiness become a flaw in design, or a lasting symbol of the ambitions that built it? Do you know the interesting thing about this mansion? The corridors hold faint traces of air moving through hidden spaces before the name arrives. Monticello. The structure appears quiet, but records show the house once operated through a network of concealed mechanisms and discrete systems built into walls, floors, and service areas. The dining room seemed calm to guests, yet small platforms rose inside the fireplace, carrying bottles from the wine cellar below by means of compact dumbwaiters. In the study, a writing device mirrored each stroke of the pen, creating an immediate duplicate of every page. Historians note that these innovations reflected Jefferson's obsession with efficiency, order, and controlled movement. The house did not rely only on people in motion. It relied on engineered silence. Some visitors later described the feeling of a place that worked without being seen, a structure where labor and mechanism disappeared into the background. Folklore interprets that quietness as something lingering, as if unseen effort left traces behind. Architectural study offers another explanation. Technology removed noise, visibility, and interruption by design. Both interpretations remain. The house holds its calm surface, while a system beneath it continues to shape the story. The purpose of these devices was practical, but the emotional weight formed in the shadows of efficiency. The wine dumbwaiters reduced footsteps during meals. The revolving bookstand allowed multiple volumes to remain open at once. The weather indicator on the ceiling reflected the direction of the rooftop vane, so decisions could be made indoors. Historians believe these features reveal a desire to control space, time, and interruption. The house appeared effortless because effort was relocated into hidden channels. Consequence followed quietly. Work became more discreet. Labor became less visible. Some visitors admired the refinement and precision. Others sensed a distance between appearance and reality, beauty in the rooms above, work and mechanism beneath. Folklore reads that separation as a kind of residue, suggesting that anything pushed out of sight does not disappear, it remains in the structure. The grounded interpretation is simpler. Technology centralizes function, and when function retreats behind walls, perception shifts with it. Both readings coexist. The result is the same. Monticello became a place where movement continued even when the room looked still. The scale of innovation can be traced through records. The mansion housed multiple concealed service passages below the main level. The entrance hall clock tracked both hours and days, with weights that dropped so far they passed through the floor into the level beneath. The estate covered about 5,000 acres, while the house itself contained more than 11,000 square feet of interior space across layered floors. Correspondence describes 2 wine dumbwaiters built into the dining room hearth and a polygraph copying machine used frequently for writing. Archaeological studies identify work areas along Mulberry Row, supporting production for the household, with 130 enslaved individuals present during most years, and more than 400 across the full period of operation. These numbers do not dramatize the house. They anchor it. They show a system where technology, labor, and architecture were interdependent. For historically focused viewers, the data reveals a functional estate structured around efficiency and control. For mystery-oriented audiences, the figures suggest a network beneath the rooms, a hidden framework shaping the life of the house. The numbers do not end the question. They sharpen it. Today, visitors occasionally describe faint sounds in the lower corridors, a soft shift in air, a muted creak near passages once used for movement and storage. Folklore links these sensations to the spaces where labor stayed unseen, suggesting that the work concealed by design left an imprint that never fully fades. Historians respond with grounded analysis. Temperature changes move timber. Stone contracts at night. Air travels through shafts once connected to mechanical systems and vents. A house built with layered cavities and hidden channels behaves differently from ordinary structures. The explanation remains architectural, not supernatural. Yet neither interpretation erases the other. Two narratives stand side by side, one emotional, one mechanical, both capable of producing the same experience. Monticello does not insist on resolution. It leaves the listener at the threshold between perception and structure, where silence becomes a question rather than an answer. The legacy of these concealed mechanisms is not wonder or unease alone. It is consequence. The house gained refinement through invisibility. Work receded from view. Technology shaped daily life while remaining hidden in the margins of the architecture. The historical loops return to the same truth. Monticello functioned through systems designed to operate quietly, supported by labor that remained largely unseen. The rational account holds. The devices explain the silence. The structure explains the movement. The atmospheric reading also survives, carried by the feeling that any place built on unseen effort carries weight within its walls. Both perspectives frame the same reality from different sides. The ridge turns still again. The corridors remain intact. And one question lingers, not answered, not simplified, only left for the viewer to carry forward. When a house is engineered to hide the work that sustains it, does that silence fade with time, or does it remain in the spaces no one was meant to notice? Records show that some beds here were built directly into the thickness of the wall, positioned between two adjoining spaces rather than placed as freestanding furniture. One side opened toward the study, the other opened toward the private chamber. The structure reduced unused floor area and kept interiors visually precise. Historians note that this design reflected both efficiency and philosophy, a belief that space should be disciplined, structured, and minimized wherever possible. The arrangement also aligned with taxation laws of the era, where the number of rooms sometimes influenced assessed value. The bed became a threshold rather than a centerpiece. Visitors later described a strange quiet in those adjoining spaces, neither fully separate nor fully shared. Folklore frames that arrangement as unsettling, suggesting that rooms connected by sleeping space carry layered histories of movement, labor, and waking hours. Architectural interpretation provides a grounded alternative. The design expresses control, privacy, and economy inside a house shaped by precise intention. Both readings coexist. The structure remains still. And a quiet question settles inside the wall. What does it mean when rest is placed between two worlds? The wall bed altered daily rhythm. A single step determined direction, toward work on one side, toward withdrawal on the other. Historians believe this spatial arrangement reveals a mindset oriented toward discipline rather than comfort, where even rest was framed inside architecture rather than separated from it. The emotional consequence followed quietly. Boundaries softened. Activity and reflection occupied edges of the same structure. Some viewers interpret this as evidence of a life governed by order and routine, a house where movement began the instant waking occurred. Others see unease in the arrangement, a sense that privacy and duty were never fully divided. Folklore extends that interpretation, suggesting that spaces where roles overlap retain a lingering tension, as if decisions and obligations remain suspended in the frame of the wall. The grounded explanation remains practical. Built-in beds conserved space, controlled heat distribution, and supported architectural symmetry across adjoining rooms. Either reading leads to the same outcome. The design shaped behavior. The house guided its occupants before they ever touched the floor. The details of the design appear in records and architectural surveys. Monticello contains multiple alcove beds set within structural partitions rather than open room space. The mansion spans more than 11,000 square feet across layered floors, supported by service corridors and concealed circulation paths. The estate measured roughly 5,000 acres during Jefferson's ownership, with 130 enslaved individuals typically present across most years and more than 400 across generations. The built-in bed system reduced floor occupation while preserving room symmetry and passage efficiency. In some chambers, the wall thickness supporting the alcove extended more than 2 feet, reinforcing load while forming a sleeping enclosure. These figures ground interpretation. They reveal intention, geometry, economy, and centralized control inside domestic space. For historically focused viewers, the numbers illustrate architectural rationality within a working plantation environment. For mystery-minded audiences, they suggest a design where boundaries blur and spaces share a single physical core. The data does not settle meaning. It sharpens contrast between function and perception. Today, visitors sometimes describe a faint stillness near those wall partitions. Not fear, not legend, but awareness of closeness between the rooms. Folklore connects that sensation to layered purpose, suggesting that spaces where rest and labor met at a structural midpoint hold emotional residue from lives lived under constant decision and pressure. Historians respond with a grounded explanation. Thick masonry and timber capture sound differently. Thermal changes create subtle contraction inside dense walls. Air moves quietly along seams where the alcove opens to both sides. A house built with shared partitions and interior cavities behaves unlike one with isolated rooms. The explanation remains architectural, not supernatural. Yet the ambiguity does not disappear. Two interpretations remain viable, one rooted in perception, one grounded in material science, each capable of producing the same experience. Monticello leaves the listener between them, where atmosphere and engineering intersect without closure. The legacy of the wall beds reaches beyond design. It reflects a worldview structured around control, restraint, calculation, and consequence. The historical loops close. Jefferson sought efficiency, preserved symmetry, minimized space, and shaped life through architecture that merged privacy with obligation. The rational account stands intact. The atmospheric reading persists. Both frame the same decision from different vantage points. The rooms remain divided by a single wall. The structure holds the memory of choices made about space, identity, and order. Light settles across the alcove opening. The corridor turns quiet, and one unresolved question remains. Not moralized, not answered, only offered for reflection. When a place builds rest into the center of its walls, does that design create harmony, or does it preserve the tension between duty and self that the architecture was never meant to resolve? The front doors stand tall and still, and the entrance hall waits in deep quiet. Records show that this space was never meant to feel ordinary. It was arranged with intention, restraint, and display. Fossils lined the walls, antlers rose above visitors' heads, maps stretched across panels. Artifacts from distant lands occupied carefully measured positions. Historians note that the hall functioned less as a domestic room and more as a curated statement, a place where knowledge, exploration, and authority introduced themselves before words were spoken. Some guests described awe mixed with unease, a feeling of being examined by the objects around them rather than merely welcomed inside. The space carried order, but also weight, evidence of ambition, travel, and intellectual reach layered across the walls. Folklore attaches quiet tension to that experience, suggesting that rooms built for display hold memories of what they were meant to impress. Architectural interpretation offers a grounded alternative. The hall was designed to communicate scale, discipline, and power. Both readings remain. The doors close softly. The room keeps its silence. And the question lingers. Who was this space meant to speak for, and who was meant to feel small inside it? The collection inside the hall grew over time. Fossil fragments arrived from expeditions. Natural specimens were arranged beside cultural artifacts and instruments tied to measurement and science. Each piece added intention. Each addition shaped the emotional response of those who entered. Historians believe the display reflected Enlightenment thinking, a world ordered through classification and possession, where knowledge could be arranged on walls the way land was organized on paper. The consequence unfolded quietly in the way visitors experienced the house. The hall did not invite domestic comfort. It asserted perspective. Some observers felt admiration for intellect and range. Others sensed distance, a home that presented authority before hospitality. Folklore interprets that tension as residue, suggesting that rooms built to impress retain a presence beyond the objects themselves. The grounded account remains practical, design communicates hierarchy, and architecture can guide emotion as deliberately as speech. Either interpretation leads to the same result. The first step inside the house was not entry. It was evaluation. Archival records and surveys document the physical reality of the hall. The room stretches across a large central span within a mansion, measuring more than 11,000 square feet of interior space. The estate itself covered approximately 5,000 acres during Jefferson's lifetime. The hall displayed objects collected across years of correspondence, travel networks, and exchanges connected to national exploration efforts. The clock mounted above the doorway marked hours and days, its weights dropping so far that they descended through the floor into the level below. Architectural drawings show precise symmetry across wall panels and door alignments, reinforcing order as visual structure. Historians estimate that 130 enslaved individuals sustained the operations of the estate across most years, while more than 400 lived there across generations, even as intellectual artifacts filled the entry space. These numbers anchor interpretation. They reveal a room built at the intersection of knowledge, power, labor, and display. For historically minded viewers, the figures represent material evidence of ambition and hierarchy. For mystery-oriented audiences, they suggest a space where meaning accumulates beyond visible objects. The data does not end the question, it deepens it. Today, some visitors describe a subtle feeling when they stand beneath the antlers and maps. Not fear, not legend, but a quiet pressure in the room. Folklore connects that sensation to the symbolic intent of the space, suggesting that environments built to assert dominance retain emotional echoes of that purpose. Historians respond with grounded explanation. High ceilings change acoustics. Hard surfaces reflect sound and temperature differently from domestic rooms. Large objects shape spatial perception, narrowing movement and focusing attention forward. The result is psychological, architectural, and historical at once, a response produced by design rather than by unseen presence. Yet ambiguity remains. Two narratives continue side by side, one emotional, one structural. Both explain why a hall meant to impress can also unsettle those who enter it. Monticello leaves the interpretation open. The room does not demand belief. It invites scrutiny. The legacy of the entrance hall is consequence, not spectacle. It shows how a house can introduce itself through objects before voices ever speak. The historical loops return to the same truth. The room functioned as a declaration of knowledge, order, and reach, supported by a world of labor and structure beyond its walls. The rational account stands. The atmospheric reading endures. Both describe the same experience from different angles. The space remains measured, curated, and deliberate. Light settles across the fossil surfaces. The clock weights rest in their path below the floor. The doors remain still, and one unresolved question is left for the viewer, not answered, not simplified, only carried forward. when a doorway is built to demonstrate power instead of welcome. Does that meaning fade with time? Or does it remain in the air every time someone steps across the threshold? Late evening settles over the slope below the main house before the name arrives. Monticello. The light fades across the hillside, and the narrow lane of Mulberry Row holds a quiet that feels heavier than the stillness above. Records show that this area once contained workshops, cabins, storage yards, and workspaces where enslaved men, women, and children lived and labored across generations. The estate's refinement depended on the activity that took place here: carpentry, blacksmithing, nail-making, domestic service, agriculture, and skilled craftwork that sustained the plantation economy. Historians describe this system plainly. The beauty of the house existed because of the labor below it. The emotional weight rests in the contrast. The architecture on the hill suggested order and intellect. The lives along Mulberry Row carried exhaustion, resilience, and constraint. Some later visitors described an uneasy awareness when standing in this landscape, admiration for the estate mixed with knowledge of the cost beneath it. Folklore attaches that unease to the idea that work lived in silence for too long, as if effort left traces in the ground. Historical interpretation offers a grounded explanation. Memory itself creates gravity in places where lives were shaped by pressure and survival. Both readings remain. The path grows quiet again. The question stays open. Work here followed a rhythm shaped by seasons, supervision, and production. Records identify children assigned to nail-making, adults skilled in trades, and families whose lives were tied to the plantation's demands. Historians emphasize that many individuals on Mulberry Row were highly trained: artisans, cooks, gardeners, and craftsmen whose expertise made the estate function. The emotional consequence emerges through letters, inventories, and accounts that reveal labor measured in output rather than autonomy. The beauty above depended on discipline below. Some viewers interpret this as the core contradiction of Monticello, a place celebrated for innovation while sustained by unfree work. Others frame it as evidence of a world built on hierarchy that normalized inequality as structure. Folklore introduces another layer, linking the landscape's lingering heaviness to stories of effort, separation, and endurance that were rarely recorded in full. The grounded explanation remains historical and economic. Plantation systems concentrated wealth at the top, while transferring cost to the people beneath it. Either interpretation leads to the same consequence. The hill divides experience, admiration on one side, burden on the other, and both shape the meaning of the site. Archival research documents the scale of the system. Historians estimate that more than 400 enslaved individuals lived at Monticello across generations, with approximately 130 people present during most years of operation. The estate covered about 5,000 acres, supporting agriculture, workshops, and domestic production. Mulberry Row contained dozens of functional structures across different periods, including cabins, a nail forge, textile and storage spaces, and workyards tied to household supply. The mansion above measured more than 11,000 square feet of interior space, its refinement dependent on tasks carried out daily by the people who lived and worked below. Records show children assigned to nail production because their work returned measurable profit to the estate, while skilled trades provided structural maintenance and material output. These numbers do not dramatize the story. They stabilize it. They reveal a system where architectural achievement and human constraint existed together, not by accident, but by design. For historically focused audiences, the figures expose economic reality. For mystery-minded viewers, they create the sense of a landscape layered with effort that never fully disappears from perception. The data does not close the meaning. It clarifies the stakes. Today, some visitors describe a quiet wait along Mulberry Row. Not fear, not legend, but awareness that the ground once carried continuous movement, work, and uncertainty. Folklore interprets that feeling as residual presence, suggesting that places shaped by hardship hold emotional echoes long after activity ends. Historians offer a grounded counter-reading. Memory, context, and knowledge influence perception. Standing in a documented landscape of labor changes how the body interprets silence, temperature, and space. Archaeology reveals foundations, soil layers, and materials that connect past lives to present understanding. And that understanding creates intensity without invoking the supernatural. Both interpretations remain in parallel. One speaks in the language of atmosphere, the other speaks in the language of history and evidence. Monticello does not force a verdict between them. It allows the site to hold ambiguity, where empathy, memory, structure, and interpretation overlap without canceling each other. The legacy of Mulberry Row is consequence, not metaphor. The historical loops close. The estate's refinement relied on enslaved labor. Skilled people sustained its operation. The beauty on the hill was inseparable from the work below. The rational account stands. Documents, numbers, structures, and scholarship describe the system clearly. The atmospheric reading also endures. Visitors confront a landscape where knowledge and emotion intersect. Both perspectives shape how the site is experienced today. The path remains quiet. The hill holds its contrast. The architecture above continues to look composed, while the ground beneath carries the record of lives that built it. Nothing in this narrative resolves into comfort. It returns to the same truth with restraint and clarity. And one question is left for the listener, not answered, not simplified, only carried forward. When a place is sustained by labor that was never free, does the past remain only in archives? Or does some part of it continue to live in the spaces where people once worked, endured, and hoped for? More than the world allowed them to claim, records describe a household divided by rank, routine, and expectation, where some lives moved in the open and others moved in carefully contained spaces. In that boundary zone, one figure appears repeatedly in ledgers, letters, family accounts, and later testimony, a woman whose presence shaped the history of this place while remaining constrained by it. Her name enters only after the moment settles. Sally Hemings. Historians confirm that she was enslaved, closely tied to the central household, and deeply embedded in its daily structure across many years. The facts exist in fragments, genealogy, documentation, DNA analysis, and correspondence, forming a narrative that is both solid and incomplete. Some visitors describe a quiet unease when learning how closely power, intimacy, constraint, and survival converged in this story. Folklore frames that unease as a lingering echo of lives lived in secrecy and imbalance. The grounded explanation is psychological rather than supernatural. Histories of control and vulnerability create emotional weight long after the events themselves have passed. Both readings remain. The hallway returns to silence. The question stays open. Records show that Hemings belonged to a family with unusual proximity to the main household, a position that carried limited privileges and significant constraints at the same time. Historians note that she traveled to France as a teenager, lived under different legal conditions abroad, and later returned to the estate under arrangements that scholarship continues to examine with care. The emotional consequence appears between the lines of archival interpretation, a life negotiated within a system that denied autonomy, while requiring constant navigation of risk, security, and belonging. Modern research acknowledges that her children were later freed, an outcome uncommon within the broader structure of slavery at the time. Some viewers interpret this history as evidence of complexity rather than resolution, a story neither reducible to romance nor separable from coercion. Others see it as a stark illustration of power operating inside personal life. Folklore adds an atmospheric layer, framing the narrative as one that refuses to settle, a life lived in the margins of visibility. The grounded conclusion remains historical. Inequality shaped every decision available to her. Either reading leads to the same consequence. The house prospered, and her story moved forward inside a system that limited the terms of her future. The archival record establishes context. Historians estimate that more than 400 enslaved individuals lived on the estate across generations, with approximately 130 people present during most years. The plantation encompassed about 5,000 acres, operating through agriculture, domestic labor, and skilled trades. The mansion above contained over 11,000 square feet of interior space, supported by work carried out along Mulberry Row and surrounding fields. Genealogical research identifies several children attributed to Hemmings, with modern DNA analysis supporting scholarly consensus about their paternity. These figures do not dramatize the narrative. They anchor it in verifiable scale, a world where personal relationships existed inside an economic and legal system that controlled bodies, labor, family structure, and movement. For historically focused audiences, the numbers reveal how individual lives were shaped by institutional power. For mystery-minded viewers, they create a landscape where memory feels concentrated, as if the past presses close to the present. The data does not resolve emotion. It clarifies what was at stake. Today, some visitors describe a subtle tension in the rooms associated with the household. Not fear, not superstition, but awareness that private histories unfolded within walls built for stability and display. Folklore interprets that sensation as a trace of unresolved stories, suggesting that lives lived under unequal terms leave echoes that do not fully fade. Historians respond with grounded interpretation. Knowledge changes perception. When a viewer understands that intimacy, obligation, and power intersected here, the architecture feels different. Not because of presence, but because of context. Walls, floors, and corridors become evidence rather than scenery. The experience is psychological, ethical, and historical at once. Yet ambiguity remains by design. Two explanations move side by side, one rooted in atmosphere, one rooted in scholarship. Both explain why the story of Hemmings continues to resonate, not as legend, but as history that refuses simplification. The site does not settle the meaning for the visitor. It invites responsibility in how the past is understood. The legacy of this narrative is consequence, not myth. The historical loops close. Sally Hemings lived within the household, bore children whose lineage reshaped public understanding, and navigated a life defined by constraint, proximity, and negotiation inside a system that allowed neither equality nor full agency. The rational account stands, grounded in records, genealogy, and careful scholarship. The atmospheric reading persists, shaped by the emotional gravity of a life lived between visibility and silence. Both perspectives inform how the story is encountered today. The corridor grows still. The archive remains open. The past does not resolve into comfort. It returns to the same truth with restraint and clarity, and one unresolved question remains for the listener. Not answered, not softened, only carried forward. When a life is recorded in fragments inside a world built on power, does understanding come from the documents alone, or from the weight we feel when we stand in the spaces where choice and constraint once stood side by side? Paper sits stacked on a desk. Ink has dried along the edges of ledgers, and the house stands still while the landscape beyond the hill fades into evening. Records show that the accounts no longer balanced. Obligations exceeded assets. Land value could not match the weight of accumulated debt. The structure that once symbolized order and intellect now stood inside economic pressure that would not release its hold. Historians document how, after Jefferson's death, the estate entered a period of liquidation, objects inventoried, rooms open to strangers, decisions made not for future design but for repayment. Some visitors learning this history describe a quiet shock, a house that looked complete from the outside, yet was unraveling within its finances. Folklore frames that shock as a lingering shadow, as if the walls remember the moment when value became separation rather than continuity. The grounded explanation remains economic and legal. Debt transfers cost into action, and action reshapes lives. Both readings stay in motion. The doors remain closed. The tension does not fully leave the scene. The consequence reached people, not only property. Records show that furnishings were sold, books dispersed, and most painfully, many enslaved individuals were auctioned to satisfy creditors. Families were separated. Lives were measured in prices rather than futures. Historians emphasize that this moment reveals the full contradiction of the estate, a place built on intellect and ambition that in the end could not shield those bound to it from economic collapse. The emotional gravity lives in the gap between refinement and loss. Some viewers interpret the narrative as a warning about systems that conceal instability beneath elegance. Others see it as evidence of a world where wealth depended on human lives, while offering them little protection when fortunes failed. Folklore adds an atmospheric layer, suggesting that abrupt fracture leaves echoes in the spaces where lives were divided. The grounded account remains historical. Financial failure produces irreversible outcomes. Either perspective reaches the same truth. The final years did not close quietly. They closed with cost. Archival evidence quantifies the moment. The estate spanned approximately 5,000 acres during Jefferson's lifetime, yet by his death, outstanding obligations surpassed available resources. The main house contained more than 11,000 square feet of interior space, but its material presence could not counterbalance debt recorded in ledgers. Historians estimate that over 400 enslaved individuals lived at Monticello across generations, with 130 present during most years, many of whom were sold after his death as part of creditor settlement. Auction records list household objects, tools, livestock, and human lives in the same transactional sequence, documenting economic reality with devastating clarity. These numbers do not dramatize the story. They anchor it. They show how beauty, labor, architecture, and finance collided in a final reckoning. For historically focused audiences, the figures reveal structural imbalance and long-term financial strain. For mystery-minded viewers, they create the sense of a house that looks complete, while history records fracture beneath its surface. The data does not resolve emotion. It defines the scale of consequence. Today, some visitors describe a stillness in the estate's emptier spaces, not superstition, not fear, but quiet awareness of removal and absence. Folklore interprets that sensation as the residue of departure, suggesting that places where families were separated hold an echo of endings that cannot be undone. Historians respond with grounded interpretation. Knowledge shapes perception. When one understands that auctions occurred here, that belongings and people were divided to satisfy accounts, silence becomes weighted by context rather than mystery. Architecture becomes witness, not omen. Yet ambiguity remains for those who stand in these rooms. Two explanations coexist, one atmospheric, one historical, both capable of producing the same sensation, the feeling of a space marked by finality. The site does not force a verdict. It allows the tension to remain where economics, memory, and empathy intersect. The legacy of the estate's collapse is not metaphor. It is consequence written into records, lives, and geography. The historical loops close. Ambition built the house, revision shaped it, labor sustained it, and debt ultimately fractured it. The rational account stands: documented auctions, dispersed objects, separated families, and years of financial strain resolved through loss rather than preservation. The atmospheric reading persists, shaped by the sense that endings leave gravity in the places where they occurred. Both perspectives inform how the site is understood today. The ridge grows quiet. The structure remains, restored across later generations, yet shadowed by the knowledge of what was taken to keep accounts whole. Nothing simplifies. Nothing resolves into comfort. And one final question remains for the listener, not answered, not softened, only carried forward. When a dream ends in debt and other lives pay its price, does the consequence stay only in the archives? Or does some part of it continue to live in the silence that followed the sale? The story of this place does not resolve into a single meaning. It does not settle into nostalgia or legend or even simple admiration. It stands at the intersection of architecture and ambition, labor and restraint, memory and cost. Across the hill, across the rooms, across the spaces that feel still today, the record returns to the same truth. Nothing here existed in isolation. The beauty of the design was built beside pressure. Innovation rose alongside discipline and exhaustion. Decisions that shaped the house also shaped lives. The structure becomes a document, and the landscape becomes a witness. The estate reflects a world built on control, of space, of time, of labor, of image. Rooms were engineered for order. Mechanisms hid movement. Architecture concealed effort even as it displayed refinement. Historians describe this tension with precision. The house was brilliant, but it was never weightless. The past here carries both accomplishment and consequence, and neither erases the other. The physical form remains elegant, but the deeper story resists comfort. It asks the viewer to hold admiration and accountability at the same time. What survives are not just walls or measurements or design choices. What survives are patterns, ambition that never stopped evolving, revisions that carried financial strain, a plantation economy that relied on unfree people to sustain a vision of civilization and intellect. The estate became a symbol of ideals while depending on a system that denied freedom to many who lived within its boundaries. That contradiction does not fade with restoration. It remains embedded in the structure, in the ground, in the archival record. For some, walking these rooms and fields creates a sense of quiet weight. Not superstition, not fear, but awareness of the lives, decisions, and pressures that shaped this place. Folklore interprets that feeling as something lingering. History explains it differently. Understanding changes perception. When the past is fully known, silence becomes heavy not because of spirits, but because of memory. Two interpretations continue in parallel. Neither cancels the other. Both shape how the site is experienced. In the end, this house does not present itself as a monument frozen in time. It reads instead as an active question. It asks what beauty costs. It asks who sustains power and who absorbs its consequences. It asks how innovation can coexist with injustice and how ambition can exceed stability until collapse becomes unavoidable. The record shows achievement. It also shows fracture. Both are real. Both endure. The landscape grows quiet again. The dome catches light. The ground beneath it holds the weight of everything that happened here. Work, hope, revision, endurance, separation, legacy. The story does not close neatly. It remains layered, unresolved, honest. And one final question is left for the listener to carry forward rather than answered for them. When a place preserves greatness and consequence in the same walls, what should we remember more? The world it tried to build, or the cost required to hold it together? The story you've just walked through is not entertainment alone. It is a space where history meets memory, where architecture becomes testimony, and where every corridor, field, and fragment of stone still asks questions that refuse to fade. If you've stayed with this journey to this point, it means something in this story spoke to you. Maybe curiosity, maybe unease, maybe a sense that the past is never as distant as it first appears. That response matters. It keeps conversations like this alive. Because places like this do not speak for themselves. They rely on viewers, readers, and listeners who are willing to look closer, to pause where others would simply pass by, to hear the details that history recorded, and the ones that nearly disappeared. Every time someone engages with stories like these, another layer of silence is lifted. Another piece of truth remains visible instead of vanishing into comfort or denial. And if this exploration challenged you, if it made you think differently about beauty, ambition, or the cost carried by those who never chose to bear it, then don't let the experience end here. Help it continue outward. Share it with someone who might see the world differently after hearing it. Leave a thought, a question, or a perspective. Conversations shape memory as much as archives do, and reflection keeps history from becoming a distant echo. If you want to stay with journeys like this, if you want more stories that look beneath the surface, that respect the past without simplifying it, that explore mystery while grounding every fact, then stay connected. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter we uncover. Like the video so the story travels further than it otherwise would. Share it if you believe others should walk through these rooms with the same awareness you did just now. Not for numbers, not for algorithms, but because some stories deserve to remain heard. This is how we make sure that history does not become background scenery. This is how we ensure that legacies, both triumphant and painful, remain visible instead of being buried beneath comfort or nostalgia. When people return, when they listen, when they stay with the uncomfortable parts rather than turning away, the past remains honest. And honesty is the only way forward. So if this journey resonated with you, if you value work that treats history with depth, restraint, and respect, then join the community building around it. Add your voice in the comments. Share your reaction. Tell us what stayed with you or what unsettled you. Stories like this are not meant to close. They are meant to continue in the people who experience them. The next chapter is waiting. Stay with us. Like, share, subscribe,